Please be seated. What are we doing here today? Let's start with a simple question. Now and then it's a good thing to ask ourselves that. Not just in church, but anywhere. Actors are trained to do that, if they're doing it right. All through rehearsal, you're asking yourself, what am I doing? In 1980, I was an understudy in a play coming to Broadway. The two leads in the show were a big Broadway star and a big TV and film star. And the director of the play was one of the most famous and one of the best, maybe the best, in all of show business. The playwright had several big hits on Broadway back in the 60s, but that was before. And this play in 1980 felt a little bit old-fashioned. But our two out-of-town engagements in Wilmington and Washington have been quite successful. However, when we got to New York and we started previews in New York, which for better or worse has the most sophisticated theater goers in the country, the first couple of audiences treated the play with derision. They reacted to it as a cliche, at best. Now, during previews, prior to the formal opening, during the day you're still working on the production. You're getting notes from the director, you're rehearsing, refining it right up until opening night. And when we all met in the theater the day after the third preview to get to work, the cast was deeply demoralized. The TV star, a woman who had not previously done much theater before, let alone act on Broadway, said at one point, I feel like they all think the play's stupid and we're stupid, and it's all a waste of time and I don't want to go on. And she started to cry. Well, at that point, the director, again, probably the best in the business, threw everybody out except the actors. He told all the designers to go away, left one stage manager, and he told the actors to go up on stage and lie on their backs on the floor of the set. The set was a house in the Hamptons, a living room, very expensive. And once they were lying down, and he left them lying there in silence for a minute, he said, okay, we're going to go through the play now, but don't move. Just lie there on your backs, and as you're lying there, do the play. Forget the fact that you're in a Broadway theater. Forget the fact that it's a comedy and you know that people are supposed to laugh. Forget about the audience reaction that you're used to getting in Wilmington and Washington. Forget the fact that you're actors. Just talk and listen. And that's what they did for the next 2 hours, and it did the trick. That exercise enabled them to get back in touch with the truth that was in the play and in themselves, and that they had lost somewhere in the last week. And it showed up in the performance that night, and subsequently, and audiences responded, and the production went on to get decent reviews and have a respectable run. Sometimes it's just necessary for us to step back from our lives intentionally, to abandon the patterns of behavior that we've become accustomed to, and take a fresh look at what we're doing, and at who we are. This is because our lives get ahead of us. Life is new every day, and for all of us, there's an element of risk in that. We want life to be comfortable. We want it to stay the same. So we lose touch with what's real, with the truth. This happens regularly in countless areas of life. As we all know, it happens in marriages, it happens between parents and children, it happens at work, it certainly happens in addictions, in all the shapes and sizes in which addictions occur, and most of us have an addiction of one kind or another. And it takes courage and work, sometimes very hard work, to reestablish touch with what's real. That's a big part of what we do in church every Sunday. Now, this all has to do with what's at issue in the gospel story that we heard today. It's easy to miss the core of this story for a couple of reasons, but for one thing, because of the tension in the situation. This story happens during the very last days of Jesus' life. He has, just before this, made the triumphal entry into Jerusalem, which we commemorate on Palm Sunday. He's about to enter into what he knows will be the final conflict with his enemies, the scribes, the Pharisees, the chief priests, and the elders. These groups that we hear about in the Gospels were all different components of the religious power structure in Palestine, which in the society of that day was also the political and social power structure as well. So we're talking about the powers of this world with which Jesus is coming into direct conflict at this point in the story. The stakes are at their heights. And Jesus does not flinch from this challenge. To the contrary, it's his mission. The first thing he does on arrival in Jerusalem is to commit what today we would call an act of civil disobedience, to put it mildly. He goes to the temple, and he drives out the buyers and the sellers, and he turns over, flips them over, the tables of the money changers. Because of the nature of the animal sacrifices that went on daily in the temple rituals, and because Jews from all over the Mediterranean world made pilgrimages to Jerusalem for the great festivals all through the year to make those sacrifices, the temple had become a place of commerce. That's where you bought the animals to sacrifice and where you changed your money if you were from far away. The economy of Jerusalem largely depended on that trade. And that activity had pretty much smothered the temple's existence as a place of worship. It had become a factory. And Jesus feels so revulsed by this that it drives him to an act of violence. It's the only one in the Gospels. What Jesus sees in the temple is a perfect example of what I'm talking about. The people of the temple had lost touch with the reality of God's presence in their lives, the reality which had created the temple in the first place. It had become something completely different, and people were comfortable with that. So it was going to take a wrenching experience for them to see it. Our gospel story today takes place the next day after the turning over of the tables. Jesus is teaching in the temple, and the chief priests and elders confront him with two questions. The first is, by what authority are you doing these things? The very question acknowledges that they know these things Jesus is doing have real substance with which they must contend. They don't treat him like a crazy man. They don't treat him like a common criminal. It is plain to everyone that these things that Jesus is doing have real meaning, which is why the people in power are so threatened by it. And the second question they ask is, and who gave you this authority? They make authority the basis on which they challenge Jesus. By what authority are you doing these things, and who gave you this authority? And it's a challenge that he picks up in a particular way, because Jesus never misses a teaching moment, even when he's angry, as he is here. He accepts this challenge because he knows that his opponents have a different understanding of authority than he does. In fact, they have a complete misunderstanding of authority, and that's what's wrong. This is the kernel of the story that's easy to miss. They challenge Jesus on his credentials, that is, the human source of his authority. They want to see his hall pass, which they know he doesn't have. So they know they'll win on that basis, and the problem will be solved. But it won't be solved. Jesus knows that approach to the question is meaningless. The true authority, the only real authority, is from God. And that authority is not bounded by human approximations. The idea is ludicrous. So Jesus tries to get them to see the truth, to see what's really going on, by answering their question with a question. He says to them, I'll answer your question if you answer mine. This is not simply a rhetorical trick. He's saying, let's get real about the question of where authority comes from. And he asks them a question about the baptism of John, that is, the baptism that John performed on other people. Was it from heaven, or was it of human origin? In other words, on whose authority did John baptize? What was real? Jesus asks them. What's the truth? But the chief priests and elders cannot face that question. They don't really hear it. They don't want to hear it. They insist on defining the situation in terms of human power. They will not let go of the illusion that they are in control. Finally, it's because they do not trust God. And so they're living in fear. They might scoff at that notion, but that's what it is. So they don't answer Jesus' question. They say, we don't know. And everything stops dead. And the new life that wants to be born, that is waiting to be born, is choked off. True worship, standing in the presence of God, always has an element of risk. True prayer, prayer that is authentic, is an adventure. It moves us to a place that we haven't been before. God is always inviting us to the life that is always new, every day. We step away from the truth that we think we have established, and we try to see the real truth, God's truth. This takes courage, and it demands our best attention. And this is a matter of joy, because we can trust God, always and forever. Thanks be to God.